What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. What I did last week is introduced you to the Emotional Sobriety Inventory. And what the Emotional Sobriety Inventory is designed to do is to take an emotional disturbance and help you unpack it and to identify the forces that are determining your reaction to what happened, that are creating a disturbance. I'm going to share that inventory with you right now. Let me first pull up my share of screen. Here it is. And
Alan, I also linked to it in the chat if anyone wants to download it.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. So last week I discussed the first 4 columns of this, and I'm just going to review them very quickly. As Bill said in the 12 and 12, when he was discussing step 10, which is a really important step in terms of emotional sobriety, he says it's a spiritual axiom that every time we're disturbed, and he said, no matter the cause, not sometimes, but every time we're disturbed, no matter the cause, there is something wrong with us. I've replaced that word wrong with off with us. Well, what is off with us? That's what we need to find out. And one big part of emotional sobriety is curiosity, being curious about what's going on. In fact, a big part of self-esteem is being psychologically minded and asking your questions, what's going on here? How come I'm reacting the way I'm reacting to this situation? So what I suggest that you do is to just observe your behavior, write in the first column what happened. What you said, what they said, what happened, or what was the situation like that upset you. Then really focus on your reaction. How did you respond to this situation? Another way of getting to this is, what did it mean to you? And then what did you say? Did you get mad? Did you blame the other person? Did you get mad at yourself? How did you deal with what you were feeling? Could you identify in this second column what we call our reflected sense of self? You see, if I'm emotionally dependent on you, then I'm going to look at your behavior as a reflection of how you feel about me. And one of the things we start to realize as we do this work, and even when we do our 4th step in the traditional way, is that we have the "it's all about me" syndrome. We are incredibly selfish and self-centered, and we treat everybody as though what they're doing is they're doing it to us, that we have that much personal importance. Well, part of self-esteem is getting right-sized, right? And having humility with a low focus on self. So it's really incredible to look at this thing is that all the stuff we're taking personal is not personal at all. But that's part of the result of this. And you're going to see that idea is very important in column 5. After we look at our reaction, we identify what our expectation was. You know, what you should have done for me to feel okay was fill in the blank, or what should have happened in that situation. And when I put it that way, I can see how I've now tethered myself to that situation. I can see how I've created a consciousness of contingency. If this happens, I'm okay. It's an I'm okay if consciousness. Now we got to identify an unhealthy dependence, and that's the unhealthy dependence that is underlying the expectation. And what I say is our dependence, our emotional dependence, creates a claim on life that then turns into an expectation that becomes an unenforceable rule. So once we've identified those things by doing this work with these first 4 columns, the next step with this inventory is to be able to claim your emotional autonomy. How do you set yourself free, or what Bill called, how do you unhook yourself from these demands and claims? How do you unhook yourself from your emotional dependency and needing things to be the way you think they need to be in order for you to be okay? That's the work. That's the practice of emotional sobriety, is to realize, to really become aware, develop a toolkit. My most recent book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety, I've got a toolkit on the front because I really think of these things as we need to have a toolkit to help us unhook ourselves from this emotional dependency. So to achieve emotional freedom, I say here that we need to add more self and stay connected during trouble. This is one of the greatest challenges, but I will say this to you, and I believe this because of my own personal experience and my professional experience. If you can stay connected during trouble and not run away, not try to resolve things prematurely, but to endure your discomfort, you will eventually find meaning in that, especially if you add more self. There is no greater way to grow you up or to grow yourself up than to do this when there's trouble, to stay connected, not to blame yourself, not to blame the other person, but to try to add more of yourself to the situation. Well, we'll be talking more and more about that, but to hold on to myself, and that's another way to think about what we need to do. What do we need to do to hold on to ourselves more? Recently, I submitted an article to the AA Grapevine, and it was published in the October 2022 Grapevine. And so I wanted to read to you the part that I was sharing about. It was titled Unacceptable. Here's the little grapevine part of it. They got a picture of me. I'm that blue guy. You see him? That's my picture right up there. I won't read you the first part. I was just talking about my journey and recovery and stuff like that. I said, while there have been many important experiences and discoveries during my recovery, I attribute much of my current peace of mind and well-being to emotional sobriety. Here's one example. About a month ago, I was having lunch with my close friend, Dan. We ordered sandwiches, and while we were waiting for them to be prepared, I ran over to the bank to make a quick deposit. There was an elderly woman at a teller in front of me, and from what I could tell, her banking business was settled. But she was far from finished. She was engaged in a very nice social conversation with the pleasant teller who kept asking her questions about what she was going to do the rest of the day, what she was going to have for lunch. Where did she get that beautiful blouse that she was wearing? And so on and so on and so on. She was loving the interaction. It was quite apparent. It was like she was standing there squeezing an orange, trying to get every drop of juice out of it. You know, one of those just juicy, tasty oranges that you just love every taste of it, right? That's what it was like for her. She didn't want she didn't want that moment to end. She savored every moment of their conversation. Meanwhile, I stood there in line, feeling myself growing more and more and more frustrated and impatient. After all, I had important things to do. Oh boy, that's always a trouble, right? As soon as I've got important things to do. I didn't have the time to stand in line waiting for their social hour to end. After all, this was a bank, right? She was supposed to be doing her business and getting on with it. Again, then I reminded myself of something that Bill Wilson had said. It's a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there is something wrong with us. Instead of focusing on what was wrong with them, with her and the teller, I stepped back and asked the important question, what was wrong with me? What was off with me? The answer hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't behaving the way I thought they were supposed to behave. I made it all about me, didn't I? The moment I had that awareness, it unhooked me from my expectation. And when I was unhooked from my expectation, I saw something quite beautiful. The situation looked very different than what it looked a moment ago. I saw a very lonely, elderly woman who was probably socially isolated. She was having an incredibly meaningful conversation with a nice young man. It was probably going to be the only meaningful conversation that she was going to have that day, is what I imagined. A deep compassion and warmth came over me. My frustration and impatience transformed into love and compassion. I realized in that moment that I don't need people or things or events in my life to conform to my expectations. Rather, I need to find the best way to cope with what is. This is the gift of emotional sobriety AA gave me, living life on life's terms, not mine. So that's what happens when we do this inventory and we bring it into the practice in our lives. So let me stop sharing my screen and let me invite my colleagues in, and let's see what they would like to share and to deepen in this discussion we're having tonight.
Well, first of all, that's beautiful what you wrote. I appreciate you sharing it. That's great. Read the last sentence again, please,
From
your article.
This is the gift of emotional sobriety.
Mhm.
This is the gift of emotional sobriety AA gave me, living life on life's terms, not mine.
Yep. Amen. Beautiful. I
Well,
like,
Thom,
I just want to say, I like the idea of what you said at the beginning. Being psychologically minded is part of having good self-esteem. I like the idea that what we're talking about with emotional sobriety, with this work with inventory, is positive. We can't be objective in critiquing ourselves, but we can be fair. And most of us have not. We learned how not to be fair. We learned to be really negatively arrogant, as I've often said. But it's like to be able to have a sense of, and I think your story in the Grapevine there is also, it's a great example of fair self-critique. First of all, it gives an example of, let's take the time to step back and take an inventory right then and there. But it's not just interpersonally. It's not just, that's one of the things I think that we come to with the emotional sobriety so much, that fits into the work that I've been doing up until this point, is we move into that, we all have choice, and we have responsibility in our interpersonal behaviors and how we respond to things outwardly. But the way you got to a better way of dealing with that situation was to first go back into your intrapersonal world and understand what was going on in there. And that's growth from the inside out. And that's beautiful. So
yeah, which
thanks.
was a lot different than standing there getting mad, yelling at the teller, "What are you doing? Come on, why don't you get her out of here? This is a bank. It's not a social hour."
Or just mutter, even if you never
or,
say
or
anything,
walking
just
out frustrated and angry,
or
right?
just muttering to yourself and just, telling stories about that.
That's right.
It's like
Under my breath, being passive aggressive, or just walking out of the bank being pissed off and saying something to the manager. You know what I mean? On the way out.
And missing that you witnessed something beautiful.
Yeah.
You would have missed that entirely.
Totally.
It's great. I love it.
That's adding more self. See, that's the point I was trying to make with that, is that was adding, staying connected, standing there, being aware of my frustration, and then really examining it. What's going on here?
Well, it's a lot of things. It's also having good boundaries intrapersonally. The pissy, we all got those pissy guys inside of us and so there's stuff. So it's like, but the deal is, you're also, there's somebody there that's just going like, just hold the damn phone, buddy. You don't get to do this one. Just go over there and sit down. We got this covered. And you did it. And part of the thing I've learned, the thing that recently in a conversation with Herb, I think I became more aware of, is this idea of seeing where I've changed in terms of, even when I'm looking at my at the glitches and and faults that I need to find in my inventories, I do it with compassion. You know, it's like, and that's what you did. You walked through that. There was no part of you that said that you didn't have to come to being the better part of yourself by telling some other part of yourself that you were full of shit. It's like, nope. And sure enough, you weren't full of shit. You were just full of a lot of different things, including frustration. And so that makes sense. So let it, but we're going to do it this way. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Thom.
I was struck when Brian was reading what we've heard so many times by the word humility. And Bill talked about unhealthy dependence and unhealthy demands. And I think, Alan, you wove into that unhealthy expectations as the result of that, and the word should. And I'm so impressed now, because I'm more awake than I have ever been, with how many people have a script, have a story, and they don't know that they have a story. They have lenses through which they're looking that reinforces the story, and their suffering comes from the story is not true. It's a myth that's been created by their experiences. The biggest experience I had with the step work was learning that I was 100% responsible for my reaction. I'm not responsible for the event. I'm not responsible for the circumstances. I'm not responsible for other people's poor behavior, but I am responsible for my reaction to it. And you talked about the spiritual axiom, and we in our conversations have talked about the emotions are signals. They're not bad, they're not good, they're just signals that tell us there's an opportunity here. If the signal is telling us, wow, I really am enjoying this, then that's an opportunity for getting more of that. What brings me pleasure and a sense of joy. And if the signal is ringing with suffering and or disturbance, then that's just telling us you need to change something so that you can avoid the suffering and try to go for the light rather than the darkness. I mean, it's such a simple message and such an important message. We were talking earlier about resistance. Most people are afraid of that or resist that, either because of the work or because of the truth. And humility, my definition, I stole it from somebody from the Middle Ages. She defined humility as truth. It's so clear. Humility, emotional sobriety, truth, those are all synonyms for one another, because it's accepting reality as it just manifests. It's not good or bad. It's just manifesting. Now, my relationship, and that's why I'm so glad that you brought in that concept of the center of gravity. That's my biggest awakening, is that I attempt to keep my center of gravity deep inside myself without allowing circumstances or people or events to name me, but using them as an opportunity, number one, to name myself, but also to cooperate with it, number one, so that I have a sense of flow, but also that I can contribute. The biggest thing that I'm aware of is my passion to contribute to people, because I suffered for so long because I didn't know the truth. I didn't know. As intelligent as I am, as exposed to really good education, and as well-intentioned as I am, I just didn't know. And I do believe, and I've seen it so many times as you have, in my workshops. When people begin to know the truth about the world and about themselves and about the story, they begin to get free.
I just want to emphasize something that's just it's a takeaway from the middle of all that stuff, but it's so important. It is important to me. It's you use the word signal. I'm using the word communication. Emotions are communication.
Yeah,
That's
right.
it. That's all. It's like we attach so much other stuff to it, but listen to the emotions. They're telling us something. They're not good or bad, anything. They're just telling us something.
Yeah.
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 Beautiful.
Which can help a lot in terms of a more accepting attitude rather than a harshly judgmental attitude toward our feelings. And being me, I need to add, why do we do that? Because our emotions can be so intense, right? They, can so easily take possession of us and do so. They can take certain ones can take possession of us for most of our lifetime, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to fear, depression, rage, betrayal, and so on. So, but it's such a powerful idea, and it fits very well with what so many spiritual teachers teach, the importance, as you called it last week, Alan, the importance of being able to step back from the immediate moment and reflect, right? Because otherwise we can just stay trapped in the cycle of intense feeling forever, basically, for a lifetime. And it's not that being devoid of emotion is the solution either, because some of us try that. I certainly have. And that's, as Alan likes to say, that's the other side of the problem, the other side of the coin, where, I become a robot-like in the way that I approach my life. That loses an incredible amount of the richness and meaning that life has to offer when we move into that denial position regarding our feelings. So it's not simple. It's not easy to find that kind of balance where I'm open to my feelings. I'm aware of my feelings. I use my feelings as information. I don't allow myself to become, possessed by them. And yet be aware of them, be able to communicate them, be able to express them. The other thing I just want to touch on tonight is, I know for myself at times and for clients that I've worked with, the last of your 5 columns, Al, it creates a certain amount of confusion for some people, because we talk a lot about how our self-centeredness is the problem. I mean, you opened tonight talking about that. We turn the behavior of other people into, it has to be about me. It's got to be about me. Everything you do is a reflection of who I am to you, what I mean to you, whether I matter to you or not, on and on and on, right? And yet, in column 5, you say the solution here is to add more self. And a kind of common sense, kind of intuitive response is, well, wait a second. If the huge part of the problem is that I'm extremely self-centered in the way that I'm going about my life, and I insert myself into everything, then how is it possible that adding more self can be part of the solution? I mean, doesn't that mean that you're standing there in line at the bank and you march up to the teller? I mean, you're going to practice assertiveness. It's actually aggressiveness. Okay. It's not assertiveness. And you're going to, send that woman on her way, and you're going to get that teller to attend to your needs. And to me, it's very important to speak to this. And because I think it creates a lot of confusion for some readers and some listeners. We're not talking about king baby ruling the roost. That's not what we're talking about.
That's not what we need more of.
When we're talking about what I think of, and you said this a few weeks ago very clearly, it's my higher self that I'm talking about here. It's myself that is connected not only to me in a healthy way, but meaningfully to those around me in a healthy way. So I understand confusion from my point of view, at least, that it may create to read that. But please hear that. We're not glorifying self-centeredness. And I know you're not, Alan, from our conversations over the years. Yet I think there is room for some confusion around that if that's not made explicit, right? It's not glorifying that narrow, damaging, limiting, destructive kind of self-centeredness that is so harmful. It's a much deeper view, a much healthier view of self in connection, as you say so clearly, right? So I did want to add that piece, though, because I feel like it's very important. Thanks, Al. Outstanding, man. Yes.
And one of the keys is to be clear on the meaning of words. I was reminded, as you just made that comment, about how people use the word ego as if it's nasty, negative. And yet you all as professionals are attempting to patch together and help people heal their ego in the sense of the healthy self. So it's really important when you use the term self-centered and or self-care, which also can be misinterpreted, to define what it is that we mean. And I agree with you, Roger, that I'm sure all of us are using the term self here in the context that you're using it as the higher self.
Right.
Alan, you're muted.
That's rare.
Yeah, I think my wife snuck in here and did that to me. She'd like to have that mute button in our relationship. Stop talking to me. You know, the way I've said it it's a great clarification, Raj, and thanks for bringing that to my awareness. You know, it's an emotional sobriety. We want the best in you to do the talking for the rest of you.
Right.
See, that's a phrase I've used a lot, but it really needs to be stated here because it gets confusing, because when it's all about me, that's the king baby part, the queen baby part. That's very immature, that wants everything to go my way, all of that other stuff. The best in me, like you says, has room for not only what I want, but for what you want. And it can take a very different perspective. It's so funny how if you just shift how you're looking at something, how different it looks. I mean, I'll never forget when you had your cataract surgery, Herb, how that was a very physical example of clearing the lens from that, you know, from that material that was kind of creating a grayness and film over your eyes. And you said, oh my God, it's like, did they improve the smog in LA or what happened?
The stars reappeared.
I know.
Yeah.
But that's such a metaphor for what happens when we can understand that there are several different kinds of consciousnesses available for us at any time if we take the time to discover them.
Well, and that's the key word, and I wrote it down. I'm glad that you made the comment, because consciousness is the key to be aware that we're not aware, then to become more aware that we are aware, and to foster that consciousness. The entire purpose, from my standpoint, of meditation is to practice the words we've been using a lot in a lot of different contexts, is to practice consciousness, to practice awareness.
Right on. Thom Potash. Well, Thom, why don't you come in and just read the quote that you put in the chat room, and then we'll open it up.
Sure thing, Alan. Thanks. So the quote is, wisdom tells me I'm nothing. Love tells me I am everything. Between the two, my life flows. And I you know, Roger, I had these notes specifically written down as a discussion point for this group. Is, you know, there's a lot of spiritual practices which tells me I need less self, right? And how do we balance that with what Alan's saying here? And thank you for bringing that up. You know, it was right on target for our discussion. Really appreciate that. That quote stuck in my head as something very similar. There's a difference between the selfish self and the true self. Let's say that.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.